what we're talking about here tonight is really images of Japan seen through American movies. We should have another, let's all come back next week and do it the other way around. You know what, it's useful to dig up the past to confront the present. And so some of these images are actually quite useful.
Yes.
Yes. No, you had your hand up. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Catherine Tolbert. I'm also a journalist. And it's kind of about the Japanese perceptions of the American perceptions of Japan. I heard that Lost in Translation was not released in Japan initially, or it was going to be. There was this big, release date, and then the Japanese saw it and decided, nah, we're not going to.
No, it was released, but it didn't find an audience. Nobody was much interested in it. It was sort of, so what? The Americans are up to their old tricks again.
Also, a lot of movie stars make ads that are seen in other countries that we never get to see. So maybe they said, again, so what? We see those ads.
Well, I also think the movie, I mean, that scene though where Scarlett Johansson is wandering through, the arcade, it is a very specific kind of travelogue, and it really is an updating of the unknowable East in ways that are very, in ways that work and ways that can be objected to. It's novel. It's artistically, I think it holds water, but I also think you could object to it.
Range of material about, that we haven't touched on tonight at all, about what Hollywood has learned from Japan and Japanese films. What American directors, for example, George Lucas makes Star Wars, one of the greatest, biggest money-making films in our history. How many of us know that that was based, the story was taken from a Kurosawa film about a guy trying to get the princess through enemy territory, a samurai film, The Three Men in the Hidden Fortress. I mean, we've learned a lot sort of unconsciously or under the skin that we're not even aware of.
I want to make a clip reel of American independent films that imitate the pillow shots in Ozu films.
Yeah, another good example.
Yeah.
Let's bring it to today. Any lessons about the demonization of the Japanese in World War II and, and past, and then, of course, the internment camps and what's happening with, Syria and the refugees, and what.
I've been looking at some of the editorial cartoons demonizing the refugees and casting them in terms of, not human terms. And I'm thinking this reminds me of Nazi Germany, and it reminds me of some of the depictions of in our own propaganda of Japan at the time. It is a recurring theme in human, the human response to fear. Dehumanize the other and chase it away.
Well, it's the language that came into sort of popular conversation right after 9/11 in New York was so similar to 1941.
It was.
I mean, the notion of terrorism, a sneak attack on the all-powerful United States, we're not invulnerable. It was, to some people, it's like going back to 1941.
It was, and being cognizant of that, because my father and his family was locked up in internment camps. I thought about that day, 9/11, and the first thought that came to mind was, no, you can't, and already the calls are starting to come out, intern those guys. But I thought, wow, we really progressed when President Bush, in one of the first news conferences, said, Spencer Abraham, Secretary of Energy, is an Arab American. Norman Netta, my transportation secretary, he was interned in the camps during World War II. We are not to touch these Americans or loyal Americans.
Right.
And that was a big maturation tone from what happened back in there. We have time for one more question.
Hi, my name's Jeremy Beck. I lived in Japan for a couple of years when I was in the Navy. And growing up in the 80s, I'm wondering, it seems conspicuous that you didn't include the Karate Kid in here. And I wondered how you thought, if anything noteworthy, that it might fit into the themes of all the rest of these.
When you served in the Navy, was the Admiral and if so, what kind of a commanding officer was he? Make it up, say he was great.
I don't think we crossed paths, but I heard wonderful things about him.
Nicely said. There's the Kung Fu genre. There's the Kung Fu stereotype, which goes back to David Carradine on American TV, and Bruce Lee, who's not Japanese, but so there is this consciousness of, and it's an aspect of the mysterious Orient. They even fight mysteriously. Wax on, wax off. What's that about?
And Bruce Lee wasn't allowed to star in the film. I mean, they found David Carradine, who was not Asian, and they made him look like this kind of androgynous Asian character.
At the same time, I think Karate Kid kind of plays with that. Mr. Miyagi, he's not a total Yoda. He's like the guy down the street. So it has been sort of subsumed into the American culture to a degree. I think that's part of the reason the movie's a hit. It doesn't play all of those.
I happened to be in Tokyo as a Tokyo correspondent at the time that film was shown in Tokyo, and I went to the press conference. And I asked him about that scene in the internment where Mr. Miyagi is crying and bonds with Daniel, where all of a sudden Daniel realizes, wow, this guy was interned during the camps, and he got drunk in that scene. And Pat said that was the most difficult role he'd ever played in his life. He cried and cried and cried before he could play that scene. Then Jerry took over the microphone and said, that scene was controversial because several people said, take that scene out. It has nothing to do with Mr. Miyagi. And, it plays with this negative thing. And Jerry said, no, it says everything about Mr. Miyagi and his character. You leave it in there. And he said, I felt that it was a better movie because of that.
Absolutely.
And so I put out the story. The next day, it was a Saturday, and all of a sudden, Jerry called and said, I got a scoop. I like the story you did. You know, we're going to build an Elvis museum in Japan. And I wrote it, it never happened. But anyway, what was it?
No, I'm just saying the Admiral's behind you.
Oh, right.
That was the last question. Good time, right, Admiral?
No, well, we try for continual self-improvement at Sasakawa, USA, and we clearly made a terrible mistake on scheduling this evening on a school night, because I, for one, could go on forever listening to you four and the combination of knowledge about film and knowledge about Japan and the United States that you bring to us. I mean, I do think that the question of knowing your own history as a country is big for the United States. It's certainly big for Japan, and we have all this controversy about you know, what does the text say and what do the pictures look like in the textbook, when in fact I think learning about the history of your country is a much wider endeavor. It includes film, it includes public debate, it includes books, it includes what public figures say, and certainly film is just one of the mediums that can either help a country come to grips with its past and learn about it and get better, or it's a country that can reinforce the bad things of the past and make you make the same mistakes continually. So just you know, the passion that you all show for the medium and the knowledge of what it can do was wonderful. So Fred Katayama, Tai, Jeff, and Peter, I'd like, on behalf of all of us, to thank you, but if you all would join me in thanking our wonderful panelists.
Thank you.